I was in London a couple weeks ago checking out the Elizabeth line, and I said I would take some time before making a video like this one expanding on my thoughts on the project now that I've actually experienced it firsthand. The project, of course, has been the topic of news coverage around the world, even from outlets that don't typically cover transit. And rightly so. The scale and cost of the Elizabeth line is eye-watering, and in many ways it makes the project the world's premier transit project. But again, how is that on the ground in reality? Let's discuss. I'm already thinking about where I might travel to next, so if you don't want to miss those videos, make sure you're subscribed and you smash that bell icon. Oh, and if you want to help support the channel through that, consider supporting on Patreon or subscribing to the Substack, either with a paid subscription or with a free one. The Elizabeth line is epic in scale, though not in the same way as, say, the Montreal Metro or the Paris RER. There aren't giant open spaces, but instead giant tubular hallways, sort of like a mega-sized version of what you already see all over the tube. Which was also something I was reminded of with the frequent triple escalator shafts all over Crossrail. Now, unrelated to the service actually provided, the system does a lot of things really well. The mine platforms are so wide that honestly they could probably do double duty as island platforms, and they do double duty as basically hallways connecting one side of the station with the other. Without getting into a debate about whether the designs of the stations fundamentally make sense, it's obvious that the architects and constructors have done a really good job executing what they wanted to here. The stations are just really nice. The stations also feel really solid and just well put together. Whether or not you agree they should look the way they do, they feel spaceship-like. And the soft light that projects out onto the hallways, including from the PSDs, is brilliant in more ways than one. Now, to be fair as well, it feels somewhat less important that these stations have some grand identity of their own compared to, say, the Jubilee line extension. Because especially in the center of the system, these aren't new stations. They aren't even necessarily needing to be reimagined. They're at most massive new connecting facilities at existing station hubs, many of which have existed for decades, if not more than a century. And so perhaps creating a whole new identity wasn't actually seen as a feature. That being said, the stations that are new, so to speak, are really nice. I love Woolwich in particular. I think the dark bronze coloring and the brick really works surprisingly well with the LEDs and modern glass touches. Now, actually talking about the transit role, because this is RM Transit and this is a transit project, I do think this line is going to be absolutely game-changing for London, in a way that doesn't just change London, but makes it more globally competitive. Of course, the question is though, without the line through running, how are things today? Fortunately, I spent a lot of time at Stratford, on the northeast branch of the system, and out west of the city as well, so I had a lot of time to actually use those outer extents of Crossrail. And I also got to experience the experience of transferring from the outer branches into the central core a lot of times, and it's not great. Now, I wouldn't say it's not a workable situation if you're, say, commuting into the city. In fact, lots of people probably already are making kind of annoying transfers like this. But that transfer certainly isn't convenient. As Jeff Marshall mentioned in one of his videos, the platforms that the Crossrail trains use on the surface are often quite far away from the underground station facilities at Liverpool Street and Paddington. And because Liverpool Street and Paddington are terminating stations, and because the underground stations are off to the side/front of the stations, it can be a really long walk down the platforms depending on where you got on to your Elizabeth line train. I realize I'm mixing up Elizabeth line and Crossrail. Don't at me in the comments. Now, of course, the transfers are fully weather protected and the like, they just aren't super fast or convenient. This, of course, isn't really ideal right now because one of the big benefits of the Central line, which the Elizabeth line, for example, is trying to relieve, is that it is a one-seat ride from central London into Stratford. So this is a really important thing that needs to get sorted, ideally as soon as possible. I believe the fall is when it's supposed to happen, and I'll be super excited for it. Now, all of that inconvenience is, to be honest, rather predictable, and so some people have asked me,
is the line really useless until through running actually happens?
And the answer is no. It's actually super useful even without through running today. The nice thing about Crossrail is that its central section has a lot of value in and of itself, and it's fairly long. The core areas of London are not small. They can take 30 minutes to get across on a traditional tube line. And so being able to go from, say, Liverpool Street to Tottenham Court Road in just about 10 minutes really consistently is super convenient. It's not at all wrong to say it does bring these places geographically closer together, time-space compression and all. It also brings destinations like Canary Wharf much closer to the center of the city. It's kind of amazing when you think about it, but unless you're close to the Jubilee line or within walking distance of Bank, getting to Canary Wharf is basically always going to require a transfer. With the Elizabeth line, getting to this massive destination is going to be a lot less of a chore, and that's fantastic. Now, before I said I took Crossrail between the surface sections and the central core a lot, even though it was inconvenient. So why would I do that? Well, as is so often the case, a difficult to quantify feature of Crossrail came to its rescue here. It's incredibly comfortable. Even during peak times, and I was only there in the first week, when the line was starting to get, honestly, quite busy, it still felt spacious and comfortable. And this was at 5-minute headways, and so the line can still more than double in capacity in the future. I think this was in part because there's a lot of turnover on board the train. If you get onto the train and you're standing, you're quite likely to get a seat within a few stations, because the highly interconnected nature of the central section means a lot of people are getting on and off to make transfers to other lines. And of course, standing on these trains is a lot more comfortable than on the tube, even the subsurface lines. The trains are spacious, and while they do move fast, they don't accelerate as rapidly as, say, an underground train. They also don't have such low ceilings that require you to kind of duck over if you're near the edge. And of course, while it will get busier, the layout of the trains in general just feel more conducive to a comfortable experience than especially the deep level tube lines. I'd say that's in part because the seats just feel larger, and the trains themselves are physically larger, especially than the deep level lines. Of course, as well, compared to the hot, cramped, and loud experience you get inside most tube stations, the Crossrail stations are refreshingly quiet and calm and really cool. And they're also super spacious, which is really just nice. It doesn't feel claustrophobic despite being deep underground. Speaking of noise, it's something I forgot is kind of an issue with the tube. It is a really loud system, especially on the deep level lines. It was amazing to me riding the Jubilee line extension and being reminded just how loud it is, despite being some of the newest track on the system. By comparison though, Crossrail is really quiet. Despite having a fair amount of announcements, which are maybe a bit excessive, the line isn't loud when going through corners and just running through the tunnels, which is awesome. It also has free Wi-Fi, and though there have been issues with the Wi-Fi, and it is amazing that the cell service still hasn't been activated, the Wi-Fi worked frequently enough that I was actually influenced to take the Elizabeth line when I felt like, maybe I should be checking my emails. I should also say that even though a transfer is necessary when you go into Liverpool Street or Paddington, it's still really nice to ride those surface sections of the line, especially close to the urban core. And that's because something trains can do that driving on a highway can't is you can go incredibly fast while also being really close to the surrounding geography. When you're on a highway, it's this really wide open space that makes the perception of your speed much slower. Being on an Elizabeth line that's going much faster than highway speeds, but that's actually also quite close to the surrounding buildings and infrastructure and even trees, makes you feel like you're going really, really fast, and that's just awesome. Of course, through running is super important, but express services like this are just really useful on their own. So much so that cities like Paris with Line 14 and Santiago with Line 7 have built entire metro services around the concept of providing an express service on a new corridor that parallels some existing ones. People often ask me if we should have New York-style express services in more cities, and honestly, with the Elizabeth line, I have to start saying no. You should do it like London or Paris or Santiago does. Build a new line, connect major nodes, and just have it run faster on a new alignment. This is especially beneficial with the RER or Crossrail style approach of having larger, more comfortable mainline trains that can also go much faster than a typical metro train, which really helps you take advantage of those longer gaps between stations. Now, I did rag on access to the underground portions of the Elizabeth line from the surface stations, but on the whole, access to the line is honestly really quite good. That's especially compared to existing lines on the tube. Transferring between tube lines so often means a long, convoluted walk with lots of up and down and left and right that can make you feel really tired even if you're able-bodied. On the Elizabeth line, it's usually one set of escalators down from the common shared subsurface concourse to the platforms. And unlike a lot of tube lines, when you get down those platforms, you're greeted with a wide open space and a short walk to the platform itself. Better yet, from surface stations and even the intercity hubs, getting to the underground platforms is often really convenient. A good example of this is the Dean Street entrance at Tottenham Court Road, where you go in through the gate line from surface level, get on an escalator, and at the bottom you're basically already at the platform, which is more convenient than even suburban subway stations in Toronto, which makes me feel really bad. Of course, part of that is aided by the fact that at some entrances, like the Dean Street entrance at Tottenham Court Road, the fare gates are right at surface level. So you don't need a big underground area to have that fare payment zone, which you do see at other entrances like at Paddington or at the main Tottenham Court Road entrance. Now, the trains on Crossrail are also super nice. I could write a book on how excellent I think the design of the Class 345 trains are. And I've even come around to the seating layout, which has a few high-back transverse seats and a lot of longitudinal seats, with armrests, which make them much more comfortable than traditional longitudinal seating you'd see in Toronto, New York, or even other cities. Now, I did tweet about this next opinion. Make sure you're following me on Twitter for more off-the-cuff opinions at RM Transit, but I do think the digital wayfinding screen displays that are seen on the trains could be improved. In particular, the view that says "You're in car 3 of 9" is not super useful, and I think replacing it with a screen that shows the train, the next station, and where you are relative to the exits would be super useful. You see this a lot in places like Japan, and well, when I tweeted about it, people were saying how TfL probably doesn't want that because they'll have people walking through the trains. It just makes sense. First of all, the stations are long, and having to get off and walk all the way to the other end of the station kind of sucks. But on the other hand, people are smart, and they're going to realize fairly quickly that most of the entrances are at the ends of the platform anyways. Providing them more information is just better. And with regard to walking down the train, well, that's kind of the point of fully walk-through trains. If people can't walk through, they won't, but if they can, they should be able to. Of course, the nice thing about this being digital wayfinding is that that can be fixed, and it shouldn't even take that long to do so. Now, the only other things I wouldn't have minded to see more of on the Class 345s are some features from the Class 710s, which, to be fair, are newer. The Class 345s are actually kind of old now, since Crossrail hasn't opened for so long. Some of those features include USB charging points, which are just a nice feature to have, as well as digital wayfinding screens facing inwards from the sides of the trains, which are really useful if you're in one of the many longitudinal seats. Of course, as always, the screens that show you which lines are having a good service or which lines might have delays are really useful, and they were even helpful to me while I was riding around London when the subsurface lines were having a lot of delays during my stay. I can imagine a screen like this being really useful in a city like Madrid or New York, where you have a lot of different potential routes you can take to get between one station and another, and knowing that one potential route is delayed would direct you to take a different one. So with my trip over, what are the lessons I've learned from Crossrail? Well, for one, build new lines with the best tech and build them to last. Try to make convenience a focus. Make sure to make things really comfortable to draw passengers in, and consider the massive value that express and just high-speed service has to people, even if it's just perception. With that, we have the Elizabeth line. I think it's a fantastic piece of transit infrastructure that's frankly going to redefine what the RER-style center city tunnel model with mainline trains should look like. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you in the next one.